Well, hey guys, and welcome to our last book club discussion of the book, The One Thing. Now, if you saw the original picture I took of this book when we were promoting in the group what we were doing, my dog was in the background. And so here's my funny story. She was just outside, enjoying the sun, just laying out there on the deck, minding her own business. But I knew that I would be in here for the next 45 minutes or so. So if she was going to come in, I needed to do it right then, right? So I made her come in and she reluctantly came in. And as soon as she came in the door, she jetted for my office. And I tried telling her, no, because I didn't want her in here in case my husband comes in the driveway and then she barks and all the things. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe you're picking up something from our One Thing book conversation, right? So she's going to be doing her one thing that she does best, napping behind me as we finish up our conversation of this book. And I hope that this is one that you are going to come back to. So whether you're listening to this and you haven't even cracked the first page, or you've read part of it, or all of it, today is really going to be the culmination as we really look at what this book is all about, and more importantly, how we can apply this to our busy, hurried, hectic, distracted lives, right? But the first thing I want to share with you, I was thinking about this before we even started this book conversation. I looked up the phrase one thing in the Bible, and I found it 5 times in there. And so what I did is I wrote each of the 5 times in the beginning of my book so I could have that as a reference. And I want to read to you again the one that I shared on our very first conversation, because I think this will lay the foundation, literally, for everything else that we talk about, not only in this book club, but also in the next one that I'll be announcing later at the end as well. So it says this from Psalm 27:4. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord forever, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. And I truly believe that as Christian women, as busy Christian women, the one thing that would make the biggest difference and make everything else easier or unnecessary, just like it talks about in this book, is spending time with him. And I want to challenge you to not make time with him just one more thing on your to-do list. Look at it as a requirement. Just like your gas or your car requires gas for it to go, your body requires food for you to move, right? You, as a believer, need to be spending time with the Lord in order to be able to live life well. And so I want to challenge you to make sure that one thing is happening, ideally on a daily basis. But here's where we have to be careful, because we don't want to become legalistic and say it has to look exactly like this, and here's the box I'm going to put it in, right? So if you don't feel like, I'd love to give it an hour a day, Lissa. I had this conversation with someone in our community just a few days ago. She's like, I'd love to give it all this time to really get deep, but I just don't feel like I can. Like, what would it look like if you just gave it a little bit of time, right? Because something is more than nothing, right? We talked about the 2-minute rule on the podcast, right? What if you just did 2 minutes a day? I love the philosophy of Hello Mornings. I almost forgot the name of it. It's 1 minute of word, 1 minute of moving, and 1 minute of planning, right? And if we would actually just take those 3 minutes and do those every single day, who can't find 3 minutes? Okay, for sure, you can. And if you tell me you can't, I'm going to tell you that yes, you can if you look at this, right? Because this is sucking up time. That's how we're doing the Redeem Your Phone Time Challenge. So stay tuned for that. But getting even if it's just a minute, right? Even if it's while you're driving to pick up your daughter from dance class, even if it's while you're in the shower, even if it's while you're mopping the floor or washing dishes or whatever, make that a regular part of your routine. It's not a to-do list thing that I hope I get around to. Make that your primary one thing that everything else is built on. That's what it takes to do life with God instead of just making him another check the box. So a lot more is going to be coming out about that and about how to do that, but I feel like it really tied in here. But I do want to start with this, right? Using our one thing question, and we're going to be talking about the conclusion section of the book, which is chapters 16 through 18, which starts on page, let me find them. Hang on a second. I've got so much stuff marked in here that I got to find where that one part started. Okay, so that's before this page. Okay. I thought that looked familiar. I'm getting there. Okay. So we're talking about our conclusion, right? We're coming back to what's your one thing. So if you haven't read the book, I'm going to tell you in one sentence what the one thing is all about. It's about asking this question on a regular basis. And here's the question. What's the one thing you can do such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary? Or I like to add better. right? You can ask that just in general about your life, right? And maybe it's going to direct you to one of the 8 areas of attention that we talk about. Your faith walk, for sure, right? We're going to say that's a for sure, and then maybe add one more. Maybe it's a relationship in your family. Maybe it's a friendship. Maybe it's something related to your service, whether that's something you're paid for or not paid for, or you want to be paid for. Maybe it's something related to your stewardship and finances. Maybe it's related to your wellness. Maybe it's related to personal passions and just doing something that fuels you. Maybe it's something related to your dwelling and making your home a place that is welcoming for other people as well as for your family. So you can ask this question in each of those areas. For example, what's the one thing I can do in my faith walk such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? Or if you have a business, what's one thing I can do in my business such that by doing it, everything else will be easier and necessary? Or for your wellness, what's the one thing you can do? For your passions, for your dwelling, right? Like start getting clear on what really matters and let go of all the things that are on your to-do list that you just think you should do, because most of them are just taking up time. And if they're not really moving you, they're not the one thing, then they don't get that much attention. It's when we start focusing on the one thing that we really start seeing traction and momentum, right? And that's what's going to help us keep growing. So let's dive into these chapters and just kind of see what these have to hold. And if you're watching the replay, I encourage you to just follow along with us, answer the questions out loud or to yourself or whatever, but we want to take things off the page and get them into our hearts and into our lives, right? So the first part is the 3 commitments, and there are 3 of them in here we're going to be talking about. The first is following the path of mastery. And I love that on page 176, he says, when you see mastery as a path you go down, instead of a destination you arrive at, it starts to feel accessible and attainable, right? Has mastery of something ever felt like it was so far off, like it was way in the distance, I'm never going to get there? What happens when things feel really far away? Do you tend to want to take the next step? I don't, because it's like, oh my goodness, I can't even count the number of steps to get from where I am to where I want to be. So then I oftentimes will put it off, right? I don't give it that focus and attention that it needs. And if it truly is your one thing, then you want to be a master at it, right? Right now, I am mastering my podcast and mastering my coaching. And so I am giving focused time every single day. Am I where I want to be? No. Am I where, Lord willing, I will be one day? Not even close. But every day I am taking steps towards that because I know that this is a journey and not just a destination. So I encourage you, look at your one thing as that journey and let that inspire you to take the next step. Because here's the thing. He reminds us of this on page 177, the 10,000 hour rule. Have you heard of this? In order to be an expert at something or to master it, you need to practice it for 10,000 hours. Like, I don't know about you, but when you hear that number, what do you think? Are you like, oh my goodness, why even bother? I'm only at 2. Here's the thing. If you've been paying attention in this book, he has been recommending that we give our one thing 4 hours of focused attention a day. So that's what I've been doing. I've been giving my podcast 2 hours of focused attention a day, and I've been giving my coaching 2 hours because I know those partner together, right? Get this. If you do your 4 hours a day, and you put in 250 work days a week or a year, which means you're taking the weekends off, right? So 5 days a week for 50 weeks. Oh, that gives you 2 weeks of full vacation. Oh, even better. Okay. To keep pace in your master journey, you'll need to average 4 hours a day. And if you do 250 times 4, guess what number you get to? You get 10,000 hours, right? That is what will get you there in 4 years. Now, 4 years may sound like a long time, but in the eternal scheme of things, it's not. And I mean, think back to how much things have changed even in your life in the last 4 years, right? And where you were 4 years ago and how quickly that time has gone by. So being consistent with giving that one thing, that time, is going to make a big difference. Now, what if you're like, Lissa, there is no way that I can give this thing 4 hours? Because maybe your one thing is this business that you want to start that's like a side thing right now, and you're still giving 40 hours a week to your job, plus you've got kids, plus you've got church, plus you've got all those things. Like, that's okay. What if you start with 1 hour a day for 5 days a week? What if you do 1 hour a day, 6 days a week? I don't recommend 7, right? I recommend you take 1 day as a Sabbath. Start building towards your 10,000 hours. It doesn't matter how fast you get there. You could do 8 hours a day and get there in 2 years, right? It's about just keep taking the next step and letting that have a cumulative effect. And then on 178, he says this. Let me see which one I was looking at. Mastery is a pursuit that keeps giving because it's a path that never ends. right? You will get to 10,000 hours if you are consistent and if you keep at it. And I think you're going to be surprised how quickly you get to 10,000 hours. But guess what? When you get there, there's going to be the next summit. Have you ever been driving in the mountains and it's like you can see this giant mountain? Or our family likes to hike, right? So we'll be on this hike. My son is home right now. He lives out in the Northwest where there's lots of hiking. So we'll go on this hike, right? We have this great, peak that we want to get to. We get to it, and guess what's behind it? A bigger peak. And guess what he wants to do? He wants to take us to the bigger one. So oftentimes I'll go to the second one, but by that time my legs are on fire and I'm like, I don't think I can go to another one. But oftentimes, we get to that peak that looked like such a big peak, and then there's the next one we want to go to, and the next one that God wants us to go to. So this is this journey that we keep going on. So follow the path of mastery is number one, your first commitment. Your second commitment is to move from E to P. Now, you're like, Lissa, what is E and what is P? I mean, if you didn't read this, you would have no idea, right? So first, let me tell you what kind of question you should ask to move from E to P. Then I'll tell you what E and P mean. Okay, so here's the question. Are you doing this to simply do the best you can, or are you doing this to do it the best it can be done? You hear the difference in those two questions? Let me read that again. Are you doing this to simply do the best you can, or are you doing this to do it the best it can be done? He says, although it's not meant to be a trick question, it trips people up anyway. Many realize that although they are giving their best effort, they aren't doing the best that could be done because they aren't willing to change what they're doing, right? If you are only doing the best you can do, that means like with the current skills and knowledge base that you have. But that doesn't mean that's the best it can be done, which is going to involve growth. The path of mastering something is the combination of not only doing the best you can do it at, but also doing the best it can be done. Continually improving how you do something is critical to getting the most from your time block. And then he says it's called moving from E to P. So E is entrepreneurial and P is purposeful. Now, he gives you an example in here. I thought that was a great example. He said, let's see. No matter the task, all natural ability has a ceiling of achievement, a level of productivity and success that eventually tops out. Although this varies from person to person and task to task, everybody in life has a natural ceiling for everything. Give some people a hammer and they're an instant carpenter. Give one to me and I'm all thumbs. In other words, some people can naturally use a hammer extremely well with minimal instruction or practice. But there are others, like me, who hit their ceiling of achievement the moment they're holding one. If the outcome of your efforts is acceptable at whatever level of achievement you reach, then you high five and move on. But when you're going about your one thing, any ceiling of achievement must be challenged. And this requires that different approach. And he gives an example. Oh, here it is. Okay. Highly productive people don't accept the limitations of their natural approach as the final word on their success. When they hit a ceiling of achievement, they look for new models and systems, better ways to do things to push them through. Listen to this. Ask an E to cut some firewood, excuse me. Stuck in my throat. Ask an E to cut some firewood, an entrepreneurial person would likely shoulder an axe and head straight for the woods, right? They're going to be like, I'm going to do the work and get it done and get this nice stack of wood so that I can sell it. But on the other hand, the purposeful person might ask, where can I get a chainsaw? With a P mindset, you can achieve breakthroughs and accomplish things far beyond your natural abilities because you're not putting limits on what you can do, right? So if right now 10,000 hours feels like really far away, whatever that one thing is feels really far away, maybe it's because you need to raise your ceiling. Maybe you need to grow so that you can find a new, better, and different way to do it that's going to get you there a whole lot faster. Cue Maggie snoring, right? That's her one thing, right? She's taking a nap. So I love this, right? Because here's what happens. He talks in here about serial entrepreneurs, right? When we think we've maxed out our potential in the situation, starting over is how we think we'll get ahead. The problem is, this becomes a vicious cycle of taking on the next new thing with renewed enthusiasm, natural ability, and effort until another ceiling is hit and disappointment and resignations fit in once again. So are you a serial, whatever it is? Maybe you've started a business, you got to a certain point, and then you're like, oh, this is as big as it gets. And then you start over with another one. Or maybe it's something that you're, a skill that you're learning or something in your wellness, right? We hit that plateau and then we just think like, that's all there is. I'm just going to start over here. Like, what if we actually pushed past that ceiling, pushed past that plateau and kept going to see what the next peak was. That's the whole point of moving from E to P, which is our second commitment. Okay, and our third commitment is to live the accountability cycle, because on page 183, he reminds us, there's an undeniable connection between what you do and what you get, right? Your action determines your outcomes, and your outcomes inform your actions. So if you're not getting the outcomes you want, you have to look at your actions. And here's the thing. If you are tracking and being accountable for your actions, you will increase your chances of getting the outcomes that you want. Listen to these statistics here. He wrote these on, let's see, page 187. And I'll go back and show you something else. He says, when you write your goals, you increase your percentage of being more likely to succeed by 42.1%. Just by writing it down. You guys, that's not doing anything different. That's not thinking any better. That's not anything other than, instead of thinking in my head, I wrote it on paper. That is worth 42% in my book, right? And listen to this. Individuals who wrote their goals and sent progress reports to friends or coaches or mentors saw a 77.6% increase in their ability to achieve it. 76% just by reporting into someone else. Because here's the thing. If you know that someone is going to ask you about it, you don't want to show up with a big fat goose egg, right? A big fat zero and saying, I didn't do anything. I didn't put in any hours this week. I didn't do anything to grow. By letting someone else know, this is my one thing. This is what I'm doing to work towards it. Will you hold me accountable to doing this X number of hours a week or X number of times a week or whatever that number is that you need to be held accountable to? That is going to increase your chances by 76%, my friend. Don't do it alone, right? Don't do it alone. The reason for that is this diagram that he shows on page 185. So I'll hold it up for those of you who don't have the book, right? We have people who are accountable versus people who are victims. Because here's the thing, life happens, right? Life happens to all of us. You could set a goal. You could say, this is what I'm going to do. And guess what? Life is going to happen. Something will come in that could either fuel you to keep going towards that or derail you to go away from that. But when you have the accountability cycle built in, number one, with yourself, right? Because you're showing up for yourself and what you truly believe that God is calling you to do. And then when you have accountability with somebody else, you can turn that life circumstance into the very reason that you keep doing what you're doing, right? Say, for example, kids, right? I've seen so many people do this. Some moms, their kids are their excuse. Oh, I can't do that because I have to XYZ for my kids. Other moms, their kids are their reason, their why, their fuel. This is why I do what I do for my kids, so that I can be more present with them, so that I can have more choices, so that, right? Like, it's always about what we make it mean. So, and then be accountable, like get somebody else's outside opinion, because sometimes we've got blinders on and we can only see what we can see because we only think what we think. And I've been amazed at how many times I've shared with something with somebody else. And then they were like, well, have you ever looked at it this way? And I was like, nope, never even thought about it that way, right? And it's never too late to ask somebody. I have a mentor that I meet with once a week, actually once every other week now. We meet for coffee. We talk about what we're doing in our business, how we're growing, what we're working on, what we want to be held accountable, how we're using our time. I have a couple other ladies that I meet with on Zoom once a month for that. I've got some people that are part of the mastermind that I'm doing, and we meet once a week for that accountability, right? Like I am building in accountability because I'm the type of person, I don't know if any of you have heard of the Gretchen Rubin 4 tendencies. If not, go to her website and take the quiz and see which of the 4 you are. I am upholder, which means I will do things because I've made a commitment to myself and because I've made a commitment to other people. Whereas some of the tendencies will only do them because of your personal commitment. Some of them will only do them because of the external, right? So it's that internal versus external motivation. So really fascinating way to look at what are your tendencies when it comes to following through on things. But everyone can benefit from accountability, whether you're the kind of person who would do it anyway, even if it was just you, or you're the person who's the rebel, who's like, I'm not doing anything, if I don't have to. I would highly recommend find a coach, find a mentor. And I'll just put a little plug in here. If you're still listening and you're here, I have just launched the beta Redeem Her Time coaching program, where we're going to be kind of rolling out different pieces of the full program. And I'm offering it at a crazy, ridiculous price. Like it will never be this price. In fact, the next time that I price it, it will be double what it is right now. And it will then double after that. Right now, I'm making it so low because I want to get your feedback. I want to hear how this works for you. I want to hear how this helps you. I want to hear what you don't like about it. I want to hear all those things so I can really make it what is going to be most effective for busy Christian women. So you can send me a message, Lissa@redeemhertime.com, say me, and I will send you information about grabbing a beta spot. Hopefully there's still some left because I'm limiting the time and the number of spots for people who get to take advantage of that. So find a mentor, right? If it's not me, it doesn't have to be me. Maybe it'll be somebody else in your life, right? Is further ahead on the journey, go. And number 2, has the same values, has the same faith foundation. And that's really what I feel like sets Redeem Her Time apart from all the other time management systems and products and, plans out there and things like that. It's that we make faith our foundation. It's not just one piece of the pie, like so many programs do, where, faith is one of, and they're all equal. No, I truly believe as believers, faith is the hub, all right? Faith is what everything stems from. And this is what impacts every other area of our life. And so if that resonates with you, I would love to be your mentor and your coach. And we can work through you working on your time and making the best use of it. So that's just a little shameless plug about what's coming up. Okay, ready for chapter 17? Chapter 17 is called The 4 Thieves. So while you're like, oh yeah, I'm making these 3 commitments. I'm committed to my one thing. Like we said, life is going to happen, right? There are going to be things that are going to rob you of that commitment, that energy, that thing that you had that you were wanted to say yes to. And you know what the first one is? Your inability to say no. Ooh, does that hit right there? How many of you have been at capacity and you still say yes, and you still say yes, and you still say yes, and then you're overflowing, you're crashing and burning. Nobody's getting, very much of you, and there's just a mess all over the place. It doesn't serve anyone. And here's what he says on page 192. He says, where was this part that I wanted to say? Okay, when you say yes to something, it's imperative that you understand what you're saying no to, right? Every yes is 1,000 no's. And are you willing to say no to all those other things? So really think carefully before you give your yes. The Best Yes by Lisa Turkhurst is a book that we will be doing in the book club. I was thinking about doing it as our next one, but I think this other one is just so fitting for where we are right now. So it will come shortly thereafter, right? But that one's all about not saying yes when you're already filled with capacity and being able to say no. Saying yes to everything else is saying yes to nothing, right? Have you ever heard this? When you talk to everyone, you talk to no one. When you say yes to everything, you say yes to nothing. It is true, because we know we only have so much. We have limitations. We only have so much time. We only have so much money. We only have so much energy, right? And if we're saying yes to everything, then nothing is going to get very much of us, and nothing is really going to get a yes. Okay, so keep that in mind. And then here's what he tells us on 193. He said that saying yes to your one thing is your top. So that's why I'm going to let one person in here. That's why when you identify your one thing, you make sure that you protect that time block. If you were with us last time, we talked about be like a mama bear. That time block is now, yes, like we just said, life is going to happen. Sometimes things come up. You have an emergency. Like I shared with you guys before, I told my kids, if there's blood, then interrupt me, but just mom, can I have a snack? Okay, that doesn't need to happen right now. That's where I'm going to, put some healthier boundaries around the one thing. But when you say yes to your one thing, you have to make it a top priority. And yes, when you say yes to your one thing, you are saying no to other things, right? So just like we just said before, every yes is no to other things. The same is true when it comes to your one thing. You are going to say no to other things. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Hey girl, we are in chapter 17. We already breezed through 16. We're on 17 talking about the 4 thieves, and we just talked about the first one, the inability to say no. So just out of curiosity, do you ever find that thief sneaking up on you? Inability to say no?
I feel like I'm pretty good at saying no, except to my husband. And he asks a lot of me, so.
Yeah. Right. And here's where it can feel selfish to say no, but we also have to think about the fact that, by saying yes to everything that's asked of us, we're saying no to those other things. And sometimes just because we're asked does not mean that we have to say yes, even to our husband, not that we're doing it in a mean way, but my husband, for example, needs to get this email off to our insurance company. And I helped him with it over the weekend, and then he didn't do anything with it. And then now today he found out another issue with what this is about. And so I said, tonight we should probably work on this. You should probably work on this. And he was like, this needs to happen today. Will you help me with this today? And I was like, you know what? I can't right now. I've got book club right now, but when I take a break for lunch, I will take a few minutes and do that. Right. So we talked last time about how to say yes to people or how to say no to people. Sometimes it doesn't just have to be a blatant yes, and I drop everything else and do it. Sometimes we can still put some healthy boundaries around it. Like, yes, I can, but it'll be next week, or yes, I can, but it'll be later tonight, or yes, I can, but, and really like challenge that person sometimes to see what they could do first. Like, hey, have you already done this piece of it? Or have you already worked, like if he can get to the point where he's done everything he can, I have no problem saying yes, right? And like coming in and helping. But I know that by me saying yes to him, I was just sharing in chapter 16 that right now my one thing is working on my podcast and my coaching program. So I have a time block this afternoon to put in some time for that. And so by me saying yes to doing his email, I will be saying no to some of that time, right? So I have to make sure that I'm thinking through that choice and knowing that either A, I'll be okay with it, or B, I can make it up, right? And so in this case, yes, this is something that is timely and needs to get taken care of. So I can do it and I will be fine. So yeah, just something to think about, because we will always be getting requests, right? Somebody's always going to need us. And when you're amazing, like, let's be honest, people are going to ask you to do things, right? Because they're like, oh my God, she's so great at this. Like, she can do it. And in some ways it can be a compliment, but that it can also be a thief, right? Because it's going to take our time and attention away from our one thing. Which comes into the second one, is the fear of chaos, right? Because here's the thing. When you are saying yes to your one thing, he says here on page 195, messes are inevitable when you focus on just one thing. While you whittle away on your most important work, the work doesn't sit and wait. The world doesn't sit and wait. It stays on fast forward, and things rack up and stack up while you bear down on your singular focus. Unfortunately, there's no pause or stop button. You can't run life in slow motion. Wishing you could will just make you miserable and disappointing, right? Here's the one guarantee. When you do the one thing and focus on that, here's your guarantee to consequence. He says this in 196. Other things don't get done. Your house may be a mess. The dishes might not be done. That pile might still be there. The yard may not be raked, right? Like, there will be things undone and messy around you. So how do we determine, I'll kind of throw this question out there. How do we determine then what messes are okay and what messes are not okay?
It's just going to be based off of your priorities, really.
That's
you look at the mess, and does it go along with what the goals that you have set and the priorities that you have lined up?
Yeah. That's why we have to know what our one thing is first, right? Because otherwise everything becomes your thing, and then you never get to whatever really matters, right? So yeah, I have, a couple other things that need my attention, but right now the one thing is going to be to get this email done for him so that we can get that insurance money so that we can take care of the issue, right? Like, that is a priority. And so I'm okay with those other things. But I think sometimes we get up and we just start putting out fires, right? Or we start oiling the squeaky wheel, and we aren't, if we're not choosing, like you said, from what our priorities are, then it's just going to be scattered to whoever asks for it, or whatever, is demanding our attention, which is not always going to move us then in that direction. Then we're going to still be like in the hamster wheel, spinning round and round in circles. Now, that being said, I love the fact that he did this. He reminds us on page 197, because we talk about 8 areas of attention in the Redeem for Time community, right? And he says here, he said, in anybody's life or work, there are some things that just can't be ignored. Family, friends, pets, personal commitments, or critical job projects, right? Now, that doesn't mean every time my dog wants to play, I have to go play with my dog. That doesn't mean every time my family, wants to just hang out, or wants me to make them food, or wants me to do their laundry, or whatever the request is, that I have to do it, right? But there is that discernment of like checking in with them and saying, okay, how are things going with my family? Is there something that's needed here? Is there something that I need to be paying attention to, or that I, is really something that's a priority here? And making sure that we're checking back in often. Do you remember the chapter on balance? And we were talking about how like growth happens on the extremes. And so one of the things he talked in here was about how in our professional life, we can go to the extremes, because that's how we're really going to see the growth, right? But in our personal life, a lot of times he was like, you have to keep checking in. If we let it go 6 months before we check in on our marriage, guess what? We might not have a marriage to check in on, right? If we let it go 6 months before we check in the dog's food or on our kids or, whatever those things are, we're going to have a much bigger mess, right? So this is not to say ignore the rest of the world. Mom's got her her headphones on and I'm blocking everything else out. It's still checking in with those things, but it's also creating those healthy boundaries because what do we do? Like we're servants, we're nurturers, we're givers. We're like, yeah, I'm here for you. And we take on all the things, right? But I don't think that we have to. And so sometimes it's healthy for other people to wait or to figure out how to do it themselves. How often has your kid asked for something and you couldn't do it in the moment or you chose not to, and they ended up figuring out how to do it on their own or moved on to something else by the time you came back to it? Right? Like sometimes it's like in the moment, it's like super urgent and they're like, I need this right now. Oh my gosh, right? And really, once they had some time, they figured it out on their own and everything was fine. So yeah. So sometimes we have to let them be a little messy once in a while, so that we can get there. And here's the other thing too. I love that he talked about this as well in 197, is this is going to look a little bit different based on what your stage of life is, right? What season you're in. Right now, you and I are in a season where we've got older kids. But do you remember back in the day when we had babies and toddlers, and if we left them alone for 10 seconds, their life could be threatened or our home could be destroyed?
Yeah.
Lifetime priorities look very different then, right? And when you're in the taxi mom season, when you are having to, jet all over the countryside, taking your kids back and forth to school or events or whatever, yeah, your time looks different. But here's the thing, you can always find a way, right? So here's where I feel like we don't just go, oh, well, I've got kids, so I can't do anything. Here's where we talked about this in the very beginning of our conversation, on this chapter was, okay, so like we talked about making our one thing being time with the Lord, right? So yeah, you may not get an hour of Bible study every day, but gosh, you could find 3 minutes if you use the 3-minute little rule that I shared with you at the beginning, right? Or you can find 5 or 10 or 15, or maybe it's not every day, maybe it's 2 days a week. Like there's always a way to figure it out in the season you're in if it's a priority, right?
Yep.
Because if it matters to you, you'll find room, you'll find space and time for it. I mean, same thing happened before you had kids. Like, honestly, who was sitting around twiddling their thumbs going, I have so much time in my hands. I'd love to have something come into my life that would consume me 24/7, keep me from sleeping, keep me from eating, make me think about something else all day long. And yet, when that baby is placed in your arms after it's born, you find a way to make space for it. Why? Because they are a priority, right? I think the same thing is true when it comes to our one thing. If you've decided this is a priority and this is what God is calling me to, and where this is going to take you, then yeah, you'll find a way. You'll make it work. And it may not be exactly as you thought it would, or you'd like it to right now, but this is all only a season. Life is going to change. And in a few months or years, or maybe even in a few minutes, you'll be in a different place and you can make a different decision. So I think that's a really good one. Any thoughts you have on just kind of season of life and making things happen in there?
I don't think so.
Okay, number 3 is poor health habits. In my coaching life, I started off as a health coach. And the reason that I morphed into life coaching was not because I didn't care about the health piece of it anymore. But for me, I cared about the why behind it, right? It didn't just matter to me that somebody wanted more energy or they wanted to lose 10 pounds or they wanted to have clearer skin or whatever. Like they're all great things, right? We should take care of our temple. This is the only one we get. We've got to make the best use of it while we're here. But my question was always, and so what will that allow you to do? Like, what is it you want to do? Right. And I couldn't tell you the number of people who said, my doctor has told me if I don't lose weight, I am going to end up in the hospital and I don't want to miss out on my grandkids. Right. Or I don't want to miss out on whatever this thing is in life. Right. And so if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're going to be losing those things. It's going to be robbing us of our energy. So in here, he talks about several different areas. He talks about our spiritual health. He talks about our, with prayer and being in the word and spending time just to be quiet and still with the Lord. He talks about our physical health, right? Eating right, moving, even if it doesn't look like a lot. Like right now, I do like a 15-20 minute little workout in the morning, and then I get a good walk in later in the day. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not going to the gym for 2 hours, but that's okay. this is what I'm doing, and it's getting me moving, and it's keeping me going in the direction. And I know it has a cumulative effect, right? So it talks about what you eat, how you move your body. Page 200, your relationships, right? Having emotional health. Because if things are crazy in your marriage or with your kids or with your parents or your coworkers or whatever, like it's going to have a toll on your energy and your focus towards your one thing. And then he talked about your mental energy, right? And how planning is so important, because if you know where you're going and you know what matters and you have a plan, then you're moving towards that versus wasting your time and energy driving in circles, which we would never waste right now, right? Gas is way too expensive to drive in circles and not know where you're going, right? We don't do Sunday afternoon drives anymore. Like people do just hop in the car and let's just drive, like usually we're going in the car. We know where we're starting. We know where we're going, and we make sure we have enough fuel to get there. And yet, I think sometimes in life when we kind of just wing things, like then we end up wasting a lot of time and energy kind of all over the place. So on 201, he shares a daily energy plan. And here are the 5 things he says. 1, meditate and pray for spiritual energy. 2, eat right, exercise, and sleep sufficiently for physical energy. 3, hug, kiss, and laugh with loved ones for emotional energy. 4, set goals, plan, and calendar for mental energy. And 5, time block your one thing for business energy. And I think sometimes we need to do the exact advice that he gave us in the last couple of chapters, which is block your time off first. Which kind of goes counterintuitive to like, I'm going to be productive and get all this stuff done in my day, right? I'm going to like work. And what I did is I literally would never be done working. I would literally work from the time I got up in the morning on something until the time it was time to go to bed. And I would go fall in bed exhausted and then get up and do it all over again. I did not get as much done as I have when I have put healthy boundaries around this is when I don't work because this is refill time, whether it's daily, weekly, or seasonally. And this is the time that I do work, right? Because then it gives you that energy, but then it also gives you the focus when it's the time to do that. So have any of these been helpful for you in any of these areas? Have you found that by implementing things, it's been helpful? Or is there an area that like stands out to you that you're like, this is one I really want to be more focused on? I'm looking at like 201.
As far as the health ones.
Yeah.
Well, I do know, like, although I don't have poor eating habits, I don't physically take care of myself like I should. And so that was a discussion I had in my head yesterday.
Finally.
when we had an exceptionally long worship set, and I'm like, I just want to sit down. I'm tired, but I shouldn't be. Yes, I'm 40. I don't know how old I'll be this year, 44 this year, 40. So I'm 43 right now. And I shouldn't be like that tired at that point. So, what are those things that I do need to implement, even if it is, and that was my thought, like, even if it's 5 minutes, like I was walking last year and then it got cold. Actually, I fell, I hurt my ankle and it also got cold. So it was a 2-in-1. So I quit. And I'm still not even 100% over that injury, but what is that thing that I can do, even if it's 5 minutes a day, that can help boost my energy and put me on the right track?
Yeah.
So that's been my one thing.
So interesting. Sure. Yeah, that you noticed that yesterday. And here's what I would say, like when you notice things in any of these areas, you notice like, wow, in my relationships, my energy is kind of like tanking, right? Or in my health or my physical energy or my spiritual energy. Like notice it first and don't make it mean something it doesn't. And here's where I think what we do. Oh, I should be this. I should be able to stand for this long. I should be able to go run this far. I should be able to whatever it is, right? And then we start attaching that negative guilt feeling to it. And that doesn't really make us do anything or feel like doing anything, right? So well,
if it does, it's for just a short period of time.
Exactly. Yes, for sure. That's what I was just going to get to, right? It's not going to be long lived. I mean, think about like when the battery is running low on your phone, it doesn't attach any like emotional story to it. It just says, 10%, right? Which is just, hey, by the way, click, go plug me in or you're not going to be using me anymore. And so I think we just need to like pay attention when our batteries are draining on our bodies and just notice and say, oh, I need to recharge in this area. What can I do? What's the one thing I could do that such by doing it would make the most difference in this area when it comes to that energy, right? And not make it mean something, that is not true about us. So that's a good one. Thank you. Okay, the last thief is our environment not being supportive. And I thought it was really interesting. He talked about two different things here. He talked about the people in your environment and the place of your environment. Because oftentimes, I don't know about you, but I think I would have more naturally thought about the people because for a long time, I did not have a supportive environment. There were a lot of challenges going on in my marriage, and what I was working on me was definitely not seen well from my partner. And it made it really, really hard during that season to be building my business. I mean, really hard, you know? And when we don't have people around us, I think that's when we have to intentionally find people. And I was just telling a friend of mine who I was encouraging about some things over the weekend. I said, find somebody who gets you. It may not be your spouse. It may not be even your best friend or the people you go to church with. Because she's like, the people I go to church with, like, they're really nice, but they don't get this side of me. And she was particularly talking about the entrepreneurial side of her. But I'm like, you know what? There are people out there. Maybe it's somebody around you. I have one person in the town I live in that I feel like we get each other on every level in our life, including, growing a business and personal growth. Everybody else is great and nice and things like that. And I have great relationships with them, but I can't talk with them about those things on that level. And so she and I intentionally meet every other week to be able to talk about those things, right? Or online, like this kind of stuff, like there are people out there who are wanting to grow. And just because the people around you, we've had this conversation in Southern Illinois, right? We're both from Southern Illinois. So if you're listening in, Southern Illinois is a very rural, kind of almost a limited mindset type area in some ways. Again,
Yeah.
obviously not totally because you and I live here and we're not, right? But we can get swept into that mindset around us, or we can say, no,
As a,
this is who I am, and I find those people. Go ahead.
yeah. Yeah. And finding those people I feel is the hardest. So like I did have a group of women, but they weren't here. Like we met weekly via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, the other two women I was meeting with, they both had situations in their life that took their time elsewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and they've not been able to find their way back, and that sort of left me hanging. I've not been able to replace them, and it's difficult because even, you know, I, there are a lot of successful people around here, but how many of them are on the same exact path as me, same exact journey that can actually be there to help hold me accountable and vice versa.
Yeah. And remember, there is
It's
no
not the
perfect,
easiest.
like, somebody's exact in every single thing, but the key areas, right? And for me, one of that is faith, right? Because I've been a part of a lot of groups with very successful women, but when we don't both have that same value of I'm building this in light of eternity, not just, to build my own kingdom here on earth. That makes a big difference for me, right? And so, and maybe make it an area of prayer, right? Like make an area of prayer, Lord, just are there people already in my circles that I'm just not noticing, that you want me to connect with, or that could be that person. Or maybe it's somebody who's new. So sometimes it takes us getting out of our comfort zone and going to a new meeting or going to, a new networking group or whatever, whether it's in person or online, and just getting uncomfortable and then finding those people. And when you find those people, you're like, hey, I'm looking for some people to like be
Do
accountable around
this.
these things. Would you like to do that? Most people would love to be invited, but they're
Yep.
not going to initiate that. So I think sometimes we have to initiate, that with people. The other part he talked about in here is your space, right? Like look around your office, your house. He talks about like if he well, let me see what page he talked about this on. He talks about going through and doing a walkthrough from, like, for example, from your kitchen to your office, right? Do a walkthrough. What things do you pass by that are distractions that could veer you off from heading to your office to do the work that you want to do? Even when you're like in your office, if your one thing is your business, right? I'm just gonna use that as an example. What things are around you on your desk and in your office? And are they distracting, to what it is that you're doing? How can you eliminate and remove distractions, either between you and your office or between what's on your plate, even like on your computer? Like, do you have like 20 tabs open on the top? Like, even your brain just seeing that there's more than one tab, even if you can't read them because there are so many, distracts your brain from the one you're working on. So I've started to get into the habit of I'm closing all of them, right? And if I need to bookmark it, I'll bookmark it so I can find it again when it's time to go back to that. But like starting to clear out our environment so that it's supportive of what it is that we're wanting to focus on, I think is really important. Any thoughts you have around kind of the physical part of it?
No, I agree. Like my desk is almost always a mess. I'm not an organized person. And so that's one thing I've wanted to start getting back to. I did it for a short amount of time last year, but like this morning, I felt like I spent the first 2 hours just trying to declutter my desk, and it's still a mess just from where I left it on Friday, plus all the extra stuff that accumulated over the weekend.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah.
and like I haven't actually got any physical work done today because there's just been so much
Yeah.
distraction. So
Sometimes
it's
it's
definitely something
distracting.
I have to work
Yeah.
on.
So here's
Mhm.
two things. I was just listening to somebody talk about this in our podcast too, and I'm totally in agreement with this. Sometimes we need to not even open that, whether it's opening the email that's a mess or whether it's like walking into our office that's a mess. Maybe it's, you know what, I'm going to give an hour of focus to whatever this is, and I'm going to go sit at the dining room table where there isn't a mess. Or I'm going to go to a coffee shop where there isn't a mess. Or I'm going to go like sit in my car, like because sometimes what happens is we open the door, whether it's to our office, whether it's to our email or whatever, and you're right, we end up spending the next 2 to 3 hours just cleaning up all the messes and never get around to anything that was productive. So like, what if we just kept the door closed on whatever that is? So I'm not going to deal with it, but I'm going to give my first energy and attention to my one thing, the one thing that I know matters, that I know will move me ahead the most if I focus on this today. And then okay, I've got 30 minutes with my desk. What can I do in 30 minutes versus it taking 2 hours, right? Or what can I do in 30 minutes with my
But
email?
problem is, I have to have my desk. I have 3 monitors right here. And my monitors are attached to my desk, so I
Aha.
can't.
Well, then here's what would be a good thing. It's block off the time when you don't have the expectation of doing any other work except clearing and creating your systems and organizing it the way you want it to look. And you get it set there and then you build in resets. So like
Yeah.
every day before I leave my desk, I am resetting my desk and my calendar and my task for the next day so that when I walk in here the next morning, everything's ready to go. Right. And it literally just takes me taking like
What I'm
15
working on.
minutes to get that stuff done. Right. And you can even stop at lunchtime. If you find like you're making messes as you go, then pause before you grab lunch. And I'm going to do 5 minutes. I used to do with my kids, we'd put on music and I just say 5 minute cleanup. Like we would be like a tornado, like as much as we could do in 5 minutes. It didn't matter if we finished or not. 5 minutes when the timer went off, we were done. But guess what? We got way more done than just ignoring it or letting it sit there. So yeah, if you can't get away from it or get somewhere else, then it's just going to mean like I set aside some time. First of all, declutter as much as you can, because if you don't want to just shuffle things around that you don't really need. If you don't need it, it doesn't have to, or it doesn't have to be in your office, then get it out or whatever the space is, right? And then second,
Yeah.
create systems, around what those things are. And like I have created a startup system and a shutdown system. And so it's a series of tasks. I have them in my Trello board. So every morning I have like, I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 things that I do in the morning. And so as I do them, I move them over to done, right? And then the next day I move them from done to do, right? And it just kind of goes back. But then I don't have to, oh shoot, I forgot to check that email. Oh shoot, I forgot to go post that. Oh shoot, I forgot to, whatever it was. It's just, it keeps those daily things. So I don't have to think about it. And it doesn't clutter my brain. So you can do that with
Yeah.
tasks. You can do it with stuff. And I can't say right now, if you're looking at my desk, that it looks the way that I want it to, but guess what? I've got to reset in a little bit. So it will get there again today. And, so it's always a work in progress, right? But you and what's going to be taken away from your energy. And I think that's the key point, of that, right?
Mhm.
Okay, chapter 18, the last one, called The Journey. And here's the cool thing about it. The journey is one step at a time, right? And now while that may sound trite, it is so true, right? And that's the beautiful thing, that step, as he says in page 208, is the one thing. That's the next step, right? That's why we stop and ask this question. That's why we don't just do all the things. We go, what really matters? What's going to make everything else easier, unnecessary, or better? And that's the step I'm going to take. Instead of wasting my time on all these other steps that don't really get me, as far as I need to be, right? That's what makes the big difference. There's always something that matters more. I'm just thinking through some of the things he's taught us. He's taught us to think big and go small. Like I know my big goal, right? And yet I know this is the next step I'm going to take. So kind of remembering big picture, but what's the next step that's going to move me there? And really just looking at, what really matters. And what I love here is he kind of takes us through this little section here where he talks about no regrets. And they were doing some interviews with older people. And that's always a time in life when we start looking back, right? Because we've got wisdom. We have a lot of time under our belts. And we can see the places where we wasted time and the places where we invested time. And we're really glad, for that. And so he asked this question on 212. He says, if you could go back in time and talk to the 18-year young you, or leap forward and visit with the 80-year-old you, who would you want to take advice from? 18-year-old you, 80-year-old you. Who'd you take advice from? No right or wrong answer, just curious.
Sorry, I forgot I muted myself because I had to cough. Definitely the 80.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, the 18-year-old who didn't have all the things that were burdening them, is a fresh sense. But yeah, I think it's always going to be the 80. It's going to be that person who's seen a lot, who knows a lot, who's tried a lot, right? And so he says this, what would an older, wiser you say? Probably go live your life, live it fully, without fear, live with purpose, give it your all, never give up, and be able to say, I'm glad I did, not I wish I had. Wow. I'm glad I did, not I wish I had. No one is going to say at 80 or 100, I had one grandma lived to 98, one lived to 102, so I'm going for right in the middle, I'm going for 100. Nobody said at 100, man, I wish I would have cleaned my desk more. Man, I wish I would have, responded to more emails, or I would have posted more on social, or I would have cleaned my house more, or right? Like, those aren't the things you're gonna say at that time in life. I wish I would have done more. And so sometimes it's keeping that, and that's not even, I mean, that's just as far as we can think, like, in this world, right? When we think about eternity, we just had a sermon yesterday on just the day of the Lord and like what, like all that is. And we're having this conversation, like eternity is a really long time, like when we get to heaven, all this stuff is not even going to matter at all, right? So why am I wasting all this time and energy? Now, are we still building the kingdom while we're here on earth? Are we still called to do things? Yes, right? So this is not a pass to like, I don't have to live life because Alyssa says Jesus is coming and I'm good, right? But it really, when you think about it, either like end of life or like eternity, when my life is done, it kind of puts things in perspective, right? What things do you want to be able to say that you are glad that you did? And I love this. He says, life is too short to pile up the woulda, coulda, shouldas. Have you ever heard that Shel Silverstein poem about the woulda, coulda, shouldas that all got removed by the one little did, right? By just doing one thing. The wouldas, coulda, shouldas like ran away, right? They weren't even there anymore just by doing one little thing, right? Which is what I think the whole thing of the one thing is. So I want to end with this. And this is actually not in the last chapter, but it really, like for me, this was like the perfect ending for the book. So on page 211, so maybe it is in the last chapter. Hang on a second. Let me see if this is where it was.
Yeah, that's the last chapter.
Yeah, but I don't know if this is the. Okay, there was some point that he said this, and I don't see it on this page. That's why I'm wondering if I got the wrong page number written down. But he says this, he goes, at the end of this book, if you say, I don't have time to do all of this. If your response is there's too much to do, you need to go back to the beginning of the book because you missed the whole point. If we ever say, I don't have time for this, and this matters, it has to be both. If we say I don't have time for this and it doesn't matter, then great, don't do it. But if you say something really matters, and you also say, I don't have time for this, then that's where you need to go back to this book, right? So we talked about this being like a resource, right? And here's the great thing. I mean, technically, you don't have to read the whole book to apply it. All you have to know is the question. What's the one thing I can do right now? What's one thing I can do in my business? What's the one thing I can do for my wellness, right? Such that by doing it, everything else will be easier and necessary. That's really the cliff notes of this book. So if anybody's listening and you did not read this book, I just saved you $15. All you gotta do is write down that one thing question. And that's essentially what we've been talking about for who knows how many weeks now, right? I mean, we've dove into a lot of stuff in here, so it changes our mindset and our thinking about it. But really, that's about what it is. We should never say, I don't have enough time. And one of the things, if you listen to the podcast, I always end with this because God really just hit me with this. And I don't know if it was specifically when I was reading this book or just something else that he was saying, but he's like, but I always end with this. You do have all the time you need for all he has called you to. Focus on who and what matters most in this season and in light of eternity, right? So whenever you feel like or say, I don't have time, I never have enough time, I'm always behind, I'm always catching up, I'm going to tell you right now to stop everything that may feel like the most unnatural thing to do because of our natural inclination. My natural inclination is I'm going to push harder, I'm going to push faster, I'm going to push you stronger, and I'm just going to push through this and make this happen, right? But we are wasting a lot of time and energy by doing that. So stop and pause and ask the one thing question. What's the one thing I can do right now such that by doing it, everything else will be easier and necessary? And the answer may be take a nap, and that is okay, right? Like I find the days that I stop and take a 15, 20-minute power nap, I'm way more productive for the rest of the afternoon than the days that I push through 15, 20 minutes and I end up getting less done. So I thought that was just a great reminder, right? If we ever say we don't have time, we miss the whole point of this book. Go back to the beginning or go back to the question, right? And ask that again. So cool. So cool. This one is one of the ones, like I only have certain ones that actually stay on my desk, like standing up, not just laying down. This is one I think that'll stay there because I feel like it's something that like we're always needing to use as a reference and things like that. Okay, so before we go, I want to talk about what our next book is. So we are diving into The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. One of my friends, I sent her a picture of this and she's like, that is like this most boring cover I've ever seen. Like, I wonder if he just had like a really like cheapo editor. And I go, you know what? The whole book is about simplifying in your life and not being so crazy, chaotic, and hurried. I think this cover was on purpose. And he brings a lot of scripture into here. He's a pastor. And so it's really, there will be practical things. Like literally he takes you through some decluttering and stuff like that, but there's a lot of like heart and mindset things. And how do we let God's truth really make us aware of the hurry in our lives? And how do we start changing that? How do we use spiritual disciplines to do that? So the next time that we'll meet together, we'll be starting to discuss this book. So we meet next on the 27th of February. And we are going to be doing the first section. Let me just peek and see. It's called The Problem. And the words are kind of big in here. So it's not like it's not a hard read, but there's a lot of good stuff in here. So we'll be doing The Problem, which is kind of the first 3 chapters or so. That's in there. Also, if you've not already grabbed your guide, we're doing the Redeem Your Phone Time Challenge, which starts officially next week on the 22nd. It's going to be the 40 days leading up to Easter, which is Lent season. The reason I picked that is just because sometimes people are doing something during that season already where they're fasting from something as a way to prepare for Easter. So I thought that would just be a great time period for us to really focus on how am I using my phone well? And this is not we're chucking it out the window, flushing down the toilet, or hiding it in our closet for the next 40 days. This is how can I intentionally use this as a communication tool and as a growth tool to love God and to love others more and more. Instead of it just being this entertainment device, this distraction device, this interruption thing, which is what most of the time it is for us. And there are ways we can do that. And we've already been talking about it in the podcast. So I think I'm always ahead on what I'm recording. So I can't remember what number we're through that's actually published, but go back and you'll see kind of where the phone time one started. It's been the last couple of weeks where we're talking about not only practical things to do and not do with it, but a lot of this stuff and the this stuff. Because here's the thing. This is not the problem. This is the problem. It's not your phone. It's your heart, right? This is just like my pen, right? My pen is just a thing, just like my phone is a thing. It's what my heart does with it that makes it what it is, right? And so we're going to be addressing both sides of that. And I'm really excited about what's coming out for all that. And if you didn't hear, we have the Redeem Her Time beta coaching. Right now, I just had another person say, yes, I have 1 spot left for $27. Like, it will never be this price again. Hopefully in the next 10 minutes, it's going to double in price. And then it will only continue to go up from there. So we're going to dive into what does your schedule look like and what do you want it to look like to make sure you have time for your one thing and those other 8 areas of attention. And then we're going to start testing it. And you're going to get me to get your eyes right on your stuff so that we can spot check it and say what's working and what's not. And where am I wasting time and energy? And where do I have some that I don't think that I do? Because we all, like we said, have the time to do what it is that we're called to do. So if you're listening to this and that's of interest to you, you need to get me a message ASAP, because once those 5 spots are gone at $27, I'm not offering it that price ever again. And even the 47 will not last that long there either, but that's what's going to be happening after that. So that's happening. And yeah, we've got lots of fun stuff going on in the community. So make sure you keep popping in, joining conversations, take some nuggets, and then go apply it to your life and your time. So kind of sad coming to the end of the one thing, but it's always good to finish a book, right? How many times have you started a book and then you didn't get to the end, and then you see it sit in the shelf and you feel that guilt trip? Oh, I should have finished it, but you can't remember all the beginnings. You feel like you got to start over. Like when you do this together, you've got accountability. Like we literally legit read the entire book and we just started in November, right? So that's the fun thing, is it just kind of forces you to do the reading that you say you want to do and to keep growing and stuff like that. So all right, well, we're at the top of the hour. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to the recording. If you're on replay, have a fantastic day and go get your one thing. All right, talk to you soon.